So today I've got David from Stripe and Stephanie from Uber. Maybe we can do some quick intros, and then we're going to have a look at the Infracost docs. And I've got some questions I'm going to ask them, and we'll kind of focus on how early stage startups should look at their docs as a kind of a function. David, Stephanie, thank you for taking time to meet with me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourselves? I think that would be awesome for people watching this video.
Go ahead, Steph.
Sure. Hi, I'm Stephanie Blotner. I'm a technical writer and manager at Uber. I mainly write for a developer audience and just really love helping people learn through documentation.
And David Nunez managed the docs team at Stripe, and similarly, just have always obsessed over documentation. And I mean, it's 8 a.m. and we're talking about docs, and I'm like excited about it. So that tells you like how kind of sick my obsession is. But yeah, excited to always, like, my favorite thing is talking to startups about docs, because it shows me that they're thinking about it early, which they're going to avoid a lot of problems if they start thinking about it early. And also it's just like fresh clay to help mold. So it's a lot easier than like trying to help a big company figure out how to undo years and years of decisions.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely the stage we're at. Should I share my screen? Should we start looking at maybe their docs and the whole setup just now? Would that be a good way to start?
Yeah,
Sure.
Let's start with getting started maybe.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Got it.
Okay. So I'm just going to kind of let you comment on it, I think. Does it make sense, or how should we think about it?
So my first impression is always like I like docs to look approachable. So even before you read or start to understand what the thing is, like users that are coming to the docs still have the same tendencies, like subconscious tendencies, as going to a website of like, how pretty is it? What's the layout? Does this look complicated? Does this look simple? So I think the things that I like, the colors are pretty nice on the eye. Like your branding is nice, that you're incorporating it and you're not just like saying, okay, here's our auto-generated docs, and it just looks like another terminal. There's some good negative space, but I think layout wise, like you could do more to kind of direct people to the big pieces. So almost like your main site, like you do this with your main site, where you're kind of you're showing like, what do we do? What are the categories? There's some space. You can see the product in action. So the docs is kind of, the docs should play a similar complementary role, where like, what are the big things? Can I see the product? Like, what does it do? So when the user lands on it, they feel comforted right away. Like, okay, I want to learn more because this conveys simplicity to me. So more of a docs homepage versus like a document being your homepage is the right approach there.
Okay, awesome. So would you advise people to then, like, basically the homepage should create some motivation for people to want to install the tool, or like, try the thing as well? Like, should it talk about a use case? To how do you create the motivation so they actually, or do you think the motivation by this point is already there and they'll just proceed to installing?
Yeah, I have millions of thoughts, so I'm going to try and like just give you a couple more before Steph can contribute her expertise. But I would say the main things are show like the top 3 categories above the fold. Like if somebody's looking on their laptop screen, like, what are the 3 things you do really well in order of importance? And then also like a one line, like, what does this product do? So I think that you're trying to draw them in and set that hook. So telling them right away, like, create a PR and see how much it's going to add to your cloud bill. something like that, just right up front, like, okay, I may not be ready to get started yet, but at least I know what Infracost is, and like I'm willing to learn more. So not trying to do too much right up front, like install it, start paying us, like start using this, like contribute, but just like get them to keep scrolling down and doing more and more is what you want out of the homepage.
That's awesome. Stephanie.
Definitely agree that having a homepage is really important. Like Dave mentioned, to convey simplicity, it's also an opportunity for you to identify what you think are important paths to funnel people down, kind of beyond getting started. If you want to, for example, really highlight the different CI/CD integrations, that could be a good place to kind of funnel people into that path as well, especially if that's something you want people to onboard to. And then when it comes to the getting started page itself, I agree that it looks definitely very approachable. And I really like how kind of concise and clean most of your documentation actually is. I think a lot of that comes too from how you're using headings, and you're kind of avoiding that wall of words where you're using different examples, you're using tables, you're using headings, you're using lists to kind of break up the content and chunk it out. Looking at this page in particular, I do really like how in the first section you have installation, and then each subheading is kind of a task for someone to do. So you have install Infracost, get API key, and run it. I think my only feedback here would be for the usage section to actually model that same framework where you're actually being more directive and kind of telling people what to do. I think when I read this the first time, it wasn't immediately clear to me that this was the part that was telling me how to use Infracost kind of with my project. I wished it was almost like a little bit more bossy, like a little bit more directive, like do this, do this, do this. And I think that would help me as a user feel more kind of grounded and clear on what's expected of me to kind of get this going in my ecosystem.
That's great. One of the things I've noticed is users ask questions, and they're like, it's clear that they haven't read like this bit, because this bit explains that, and it seems like they're getting maybe lost in this bit. Like you're kind of saying it doesn't really direct them. It says, here's two options, like, I don't know, pick one.
Mm-hmm.
So what would success look like when somebody's like finished scrolling down the getting started page? Like, how do you know, like, you've kind of, if you're observing like a few people looking at your docs the first time, I guess, how do you know like it's working? Or what do you aim for? Like, do you want to get them to like go explore? You want them, should you be focusing them on like one specific task so they get like some immediate value out of the product and docs?
My general advice is you want so here we're talking about a getting started page. To take a step back real quick, so I wanted to show you an actual example, and luckily the GitLab docs are a pretty good example for what we were talking about. I just popped it in the chat, and I watched your video with Sid, so I was like, oh, maybe GitLab has a good example here. So if you scroll down, this covers what you were asking about, use cases, and we were talking about, layout. Like, this combines those things perfectly. You may not have 6 use cases, that's totally fine. You could just have 3, or you could just have 1. But here they're showing some graphics. They're showing like a one line, here's what the use case is, so people can start in their head to map like, okay, I see what this product does. Is this product for me? Is this product for what I need? And then like very easy, spaced out, like, okay, now go take an action. So they're drawing you in. You can't do anything with this page. You're not installing GitLab or using it at all. It's just like using it as a springboard. And then, so if we were to say, or if they had a CTA that was like, okay, now go get started, and it lands you to that getting started page, now we're talking about what you have on your Infracost docs. And to answer your question of like, what does success look like? That is a question for your company to answer, like, what do you want users to do? Like, is it really important for them to take a certain action? Like, do you feel like if they just install it, it's going to be sticky, like they're going to see how easy it is to install? Or do you want them to do their first PR and see the product in action? Like, figure out what that like simple hello world, like you starting to set the hook action is for, because really I mostly focus on new users. Like the getting started page, you want to focus on brand new users, not people that are going to go back and revisit the thing. You have other docs for that. So toe that line of like show simplicity, set the hook to then get them to do the next thing, whatever that thing is. And that's up to you all to figure out, like, what are your strategic goals?
Yeah, when we demo the product, this is where everybody smiles during the demo. When we show them the
awesome, yeah.
Because immediately it kind of like just becomes very clear. So maybe, and when we get into CI/CD pipelines, the usage of the tool grows by like an order of magnitude, which makes sense because the whole team is now using versus one person just on the terminal. So we kind of want to drive towards that, but so far I've done it in a pretty poor way by like, that's my only hook.
It's buried, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Have you heard about have you seen any eye tracking studies with documentation, Ali? Like, we're nerding out. Me and Steph, this comes up all the time. Like, if we say F pattern, like, we know what we're talking about. But there are these eye tracking studies that shows how people read documentation, and it's typically an F pattern. Like, they go to the top, they read the first line, and then they keep scanning straight down. They might see something that catches their eye, they'll read across, and then they'll keep scanning and scanning. So you can imagine, like, if a user is going to just scan lightly until they find what they want, like, if this is what the hook is, like, it can get really buried. So you want it to be early, first of all, because users may not even scroll. Like, above the fold is basically like the first page of Google search results. Like, after that, like, it could be the Wild West. So showing that text, but then also, like, you could even just steal that graphic from your homepage and show it there too. So people know what they're getting into, and like, they're excited now to go install it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great point. The first thing we were trying to do is to kind of get them to install and register for an API key, but really by this point they still haven't seen anything about CI/CD or like the thing that makes them smile. So I think we can kind of change that. We've kind of like buried that in here, where like now you can see what it actually looks like when you add in, where this stuff maybe should be brought to up front.
What is the demo link? Sorry, if you go back.
Yeah,
so if you put the word demo, that's eye candy for developers too.
Okay, so demo actually takes you to the repo where this has actually been set up. So the demo link should actually maybe be to like this thing here, where like this is the app in action now. And this is the link. Sorry, this is the comment that the app left.
Yeah, that would be something I would imagine you'd want to highlight too.
Okay, awesome. I guess any other tips on people thinking about like so far we've kind of covered the landing page or what the home page could be versus a getting started page and how that could kind of function. Any other tips on those areas before we kind of talk about other use cases?
I think the point about the CI/CD integration point kind of being buried raises an interesting point about like when someone comes to a document and it's kind of long and, they kind of have to scroll a bit, it's really helpful to put up front and set the expectations for what they can expect as the outcome of reading this document or like completing the steps here. Like by the end of reading this page, you will, have your own pull request that looks like this. And then maybe you have like the cool screenshot or the link, something like that. Basically setting their expectations so that they know, okay, like by the end of this page, I will have like tested out on a sample project. I will have tested out on my project, so that they can really easily know from the beginning, okay, this document is something I'm interested in, or actually I'm not trying to set anything up. I'm more interested in
Nice.
kind of learning why it's important or learning about features.
Perfect. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because
Yeah.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to change directions, so I'll let you.
Just
finish.
one. So as you were saying that, because of how Terraform or HashiCorp is like pushing new users to sign up for something called Terraform Cloud, we have a lot of users who actually want, like, they try to use the tool, but they kind of want to use it with one of these two tools. So essentially, if they were to follow the CI/CD, they kind of maybe need to read this first and then come back to CI/CD integrations, because they kind of, there's some special notes here of like some popular, maybe like, I don't know, 30%, 40% of people who use the tool would be using it with this as well. So as you were saying that, Steph, of like, is this for me? That's another thing we've not really clarified here, is like, maybe this is not the page you should be following. If you're like doing this, you should really want to go read this.
Definitely.
Cool. Sorry, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you asked earlier, like, what does success look like? How do you make sure this page is working? Like constant user research is the only way that like you can find out the answer. If you know your high level goals, like what are you pitching to investors? Like you're going to have X amount of MAUs, like X amount of PRs, whatever those high level goals you care about, like keep that in mind as you test this page with users, and ask yourselves if it's inching you towards those strategic goals. So like at Stripe, we talk to users, multiple users every week. Like it doesn't matter, all shapes and sizes. We have them go through our getting started flows, even our most simplest ones, and see, like, even though we've refined them over and over for years, like we pretty much always learn something new that we can tweak. And it doesn't need to be really formal. Like offer a $10 gift card to like a random developer and just say like, hey, can you try out our new guide? And can you talk out loud as you do it? So that's the best way that I've learned, talk to every time you make a change, but also just like on a schedule, once a week, a few times a month, because the time they're going to save you with giving them that gift card of just like development hours is exponential. So that's really how you can shape over time. Like, okay, is this really helping us? Is this page successful?
Awesome. So in the same way that we talk to users like about the product and the features and like these detailed demos, you would just pull up the docs, or you would kind of like give me some tactical tips on like how would you do it?
Yeah, I always test that first time user experience, first impression. So you get a fresh user, say like, okay, you're getting started with our product. What do you think? Like you land on this page, what do you think? And ask them to be honest, like, well, I don't know what this is, or I think this is what you do. And let them just like talk through, those first impressions, and then give them an action like, okay, do you mind pulling up a terminal and like actually installing this? So you get to see, because a lot of times it's easy to develop docs in a vacuum. Like, okay, these are my tools. This is my development environment. This is like how I do things. These are my ergonomics. And then you see how a user actually approaches it, and those little tweaks and changes like really affect their experience. So watching them, like either watch them install or just say like, okay, mentally install this in your head, like talk through, okay, you're going to go install this. What do you think? Okay, here's the next step. Like, is this all making sense? So yeah, again, it doesn't have to be really formal to get a lot of signal, and you can also refine those questions over time, but that's generally like my tactical advice, is just build the habit of like having users talk through your getting started page like over and over and over, so you are constantly evolving with them.
Okay, I think that's great advice. I hadn't really thought of it as like a separate thing that you should actively be doing user research on and studies on. I think that's like, it's easy to overlook that because everyone talks about the product needing that, but the docs is kind of part of the product.
Yeah, and it's
that's
easier
like a key
than
point.
Yeah, and it's easier than doing full on like product testing a lot of times, especially if you're doing early explorations, because it's just a document. Like they can in a couple minutes tell you, simulate what it would be like to use it. And you didn't build the product yet, or, if you're giving them sample documentation, this is what the integration is going to look like. This is what the commands are going to look like. You don't even have to build any of that yet, because they're telling you, oh, this doesn't make sense to me. This is confusing. And before you've written any code or prototype something like the actual product, you can go incorporate that feedback. So it's a great way to use docs as an interface to test out upcoming things or early explorations. We do that all the time, and it helps us out a lot.
It's also a great way to test out what Dave was mentioning earlier about kind of eye patterns and how people are like experiencing your documentation. So for example, if like you would share a link with someone and watch their screen, you could even see how do they scroll. When they go to the page, do they immediately go all the way to the bottom? Are they skipping over things that you're expecting them to click? Are they like having to hunt around, trying to find things? Are they like lingering on different images? Like it's really helpful for that kind of feedback too.
Awesome. That's really good advice. I'm going to have a quick look at the agenda. I think we kind of, this would be another topic it would be great to get your advice on, is so far, the documentation kind of describes features, like here's the environment variables that you could do. Here is the config file, and here's how you can generate reports. But we don't have anything. We started adding guides, but they're not like, they're kind of like migrating from this version to this version. So we don't have anything that talks about use cases or what people are meant to do with this product or tool, because it's a workflow tool. It's something that you're meant to kind of adopt. How do you kind of, how do you kind of focus the docs? Do you kind of need both? Do you kind of split out so you have like guides and use cases versus like feature docs? How do you think about that?
This is probably the topic me and Steph have spent the most time over the years discussing. So I want to let you lead off, because I need to gather my thoughts. It's a great question, Ali. It's great that you're thinking about it.
Yeah, it's also really challenging too when you're launching documentation for the first time, when you're just starting out, to know how to choose and what to put up first. And it's very, I think, like cognitively intuitive to start out by just putting up feature documentation. But, and I'm super biased here, but I think like task-based documentation is the way to go. To really help guide your users towards what they're trying to accomplish. Like, of course, you're going to have, different overview pages or different kind of conceptual pages that describe how things work, but users are kind of coming to your documentation because they either are trying to learn something, they want to accomplish some task or goal, or they're really frustrated, like they're super stressed out, something is broken, it's not working the way they're expecting it to. So the more you can kind of guide them towards what they're trying to accomplish, the more you can reduce the cognitive load on them, I think kind of the better off you are. But it is more work on the creator side to structure things as task-based documentation, because you really have to understand who are your users and what are they trying to do, and then kind of structure your documentation around those tasks. That's my bias, Dave may have another approach.
Yeah, I'll use stronger language and say that's like the only way to do it properly. But it's also by far the hardest way to do it. And I think the easiest thing you can do, like the best tactic, is to just get your language and terminology mapped to how users are thinking. So it's really easy when you build an awesome product with like all these cool technical features. You want to talk about them, you want to showcase them, like you have these awesome names that you tested out that you're going with for your features. But really users are thinking, they're searching Google for like how to save money with AWS or whatever it is. Like they're not like use Infracost like 2.0 cloud saver, like But that's just the standard, and we've all done it when we write our docs. So the easiest way is to think like, write down just three use cases. Like, what are users searching Google? What queries are they punching in that we want Infracost to show up like as one of the top results? And so it could be like how to save with cloud, like I don't know, what get started with cloud. Like you can think broad or more specific, and write those into your docs and then map your docs to those. So like use case 1, how to save money with the cloud, or how to save money. I don't know. I'm getting tech writers end up spending way too much time trying to be precise with language, so I'll just skip ahead. But once you have that use case, on your page, front and center, hopefully that's mapped to what users are searching for. Then you piece by piece start mapping your documentation. Okay, step 1 is getting started. Step 2 is assessing whatever your stack, and kind of lead them into more and more. But information architecture wise, it should always map to that use case. And the easiest way to do that is like, what are the problems? And like Steph said, what are the tasks that they're thinking about in their head? And start there and then work backwards from that.
So for this next part, I thought it would be cool if we kind of zone out a bit, and instead of focusing on like Infracost or docs related to Infracost, can I ask you more generic questions around how early stage startups, like seed stage by early stage, who are like developer focused, when should they start thinking about docs? Like, should it be before the product? Should it be part of the product? Like, and then not just when, what is important for them to consider when they're thinking about documentation?
I think. Go ahead, Steph.
Oh, go ahead. No, you.
Lots of thoughts, so I'll let you go.
I think you should consider the docs as part of your product, like the same care and consideration that you'd put into your product that you're launching and you're trying to get adoption of. Think of your documentation in that same way. It's like an incredible tool for increasing adoption, brand reputation, reducing onboarding and support time, just overall wonderfulness. So I think you should definitely consider it part of your product. I think also maybe don't worry too much about being comprehensive. I think that's a really big misconception that some people have, is that, oh, if I have documentation, and we're early stage, I have to document all the things, but we don't have all these things figured out yet. And it's going to take so much time to write all these different pages, and I have to have this like 100 different pages on my site. I think the kind of approach that you started with is great, where you're just focusing on that high priority content that will unlock your users' needs and goals and your company's goals. So things like what is this? Why is it beneficial? Why is it beneficial to you? Getting started, like Dave mentioned before, those kind of 3 key tasks and how-tos, maybe a little bit about troubleshooting. It doesn't have to be this like very intense site. People probably prefer less content, actually. And just gather feedback early, like Dave mentioned, through user research, the same as you would with your product. When you're starting out really early and you're just trying to find the right direction, do the same with your documentation.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I agree. It's part of the product. Like, you don't want to say do this first. You definitely don't want to say do this after, or do this last, which I think is kind of the agile. Like, if you're going pure agile, that's like written into the agile code, which is like do all the non-essential tasks at the end, and documentation is like bucketed into that. But thinking about it as you're writing the product, like, which is what I love about Stripe, and I'm in heaven, is like when you're hearing people discuss products, like, is this a good approach? Like, people are already talking about what would the integration experience look like? What kind of documentation are we going to create? So thinking about it at that stage and just kind of letting it organically fold in, where you're saying, like, as we're testing out the product and we're surveying the user experience, like, docs are obviously a part of that, and the rest of it will kind of take care of itself from there. And you'll all get better as you go, like at writing documentation. But yeah, some of the benefits, like the acquisition cost. So as a tech writer, you're constantly justifying like why your company needs documentation, why you need more tech writers. So you're usually spending time like showing the ROI, like look how much cheaper it is to acquire a customer and how much more they spend on our product when they discover us on a search engine versus like a salesperson reaching out, setting up a demo, getting somebody to convince them to buy it over a period of time. So you think about like, and that's great, you're making a lot more money more efficiently, but I like at Stripe where they're like, yeah, it's fine. We know that like the business impact is there. We care about the user experience. So it's great that we're thinking about, it's just a better experience when a user can feel smart finding your product and using it without any human intervention. So it's the cost part and then the user experience part, which is like, what else do you need if those two things are in harmony? So if you think of those as you're building the product, then yeah, it needs to be like, those are essential to a good product. So it should just constantly be intertwined.
That's a very good way of looking at it. I think a lot of, especially in the open source space projects, the documentation is quite weak, and it's probably because it's not been thought of sometimes as part of the product. So specifically on open source, then, I think you both have experience with that. The contributors are often from a variety of different levels and backgrounds and from all over the world. And like, would you encourage the core maintenance team or the core maintainers of the project to kind of get the contributors to also think about documentation early on, or should they own the documentation and kind of try and control that? Do you have any tips or advice there?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about the documentation as the product, you can kind of think of it as the same way as you would think about somebody making a pull request to change the source code. You're probably not going to let some random person just come in and change everything without someone taking a look at it and reviewing it. So you can kind of consider having kind of the core team be there to really review things that your contributors are trying to submit and change about your documentation. I think as a core team, you can have really clear kind of principles and ideas about how you want the content to be structured and allow people to contribute, but make sure that you're still adhering to those principles that you've identified. But a way I've seen it done really well in open source is kind of similar to how Infracost will leave a comment on a pull request. You can set up an automated comment to give people some kind of checklist to say, did you read our code of conduct? Did you read our contributor guide? Did you write tests to validate this change? Did you update docs? Like, you can kind of build it in to be just one of those kind of core things that people are thinking about as they're making a pull request. And then it just becomes normal and it becomes part of like the culture of your open source project.
That's very cool. I think in a lot of ways, the way we're thinking about changing the engineering culture to be cost aware, I'm hearing kind of the same thing with documentation. It's just creating this culture where people kind of think of it and kind of spend time on it. And I guess we have to offer training or tips to people as well. Otherwise, it's I don't know. Or what's your experience been with that? I guess it's part of a bigger question of like, do you then like point them to like blogs? Like it seems like it's accepted now. Like when you're submitting a pull request, yeah, it obviously needs tests, and it's like industry, I don't know, accepted. Do you feel like it's the same with docs? When somebody like sends a pull request, you kind of expect it, so they've thought about it. And is it? I guess the question is, does it create a barrier? Because at the early stages of an open source project, you kind of desperately want contributors to come and like check out the project.
Mm-hmm.
So do you take on the discussions we've had with Alistair sometimes have been, let's just get them to write the code. We'll do all the documentation. So we kind of reduce the barriers, but I don't think that scales.
Definitely won't scale. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it makes sense for the core team to set that framework up, right? And like you already have that initial documentation there as like, this is our standard for when we have features or like when we have tasks and use cases, this is how we document them. And then that way you're reducing the barrier by saying, here's the model, all you have to do is follow it. Or kind of like plug things in.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach to set the example of like, okay, we know we want good documentation and we also want pull requests. We don't want to like create this really high barrier where we're just not going to get any contributions because people are going to be like, nah, I'm good. This is too much work. But I think you should start to fittingly like document yourself out of those tasks. So put together a very light style guide or find one that you like Microsoft Manual of Style is publicly available. It's pretty awesome and thorough. Like find one that you like and then add your one sheet, like, and these are the Infracost specific things. Like don't make a ton of rules for people, but kind of find that sweet spot. And then also, so style guide and also just like PR guidelines, like Steph was saying, what does a good PR review look like? What is it like? Show by example, have some PRs where you're giving people feedback on the documentation, and you know, put that in the run book for a good PR review. But yeah, so I think the balance is like you want more contributions and then you also want high quality contributions. So playing with like, okay, how much, like, what are people getting out of this? Are we incentivizing them? Like, are we showing how excited we are when they like add to the documentation? Do we have a leaderboard to like show how many people, like how many doc contributions people have contributed? So understanding that like people don't contribute to open source documentation because for the most part, I think they know nobody really cares. Like, I want to fix this one thing because it's going to help me, or people are going to like be excited that I patched up this thing. But nobody's going to notice if I go fix a bunch of typos or like add a new docs page. So just signaling like that stuff is important. And this isn't open source, but I've found the easiest way to like improve a docs culture is to go to the engineering ladder at a company and add in some documentation pointers. So like, what does it take to get to senior engineer? Like, write good documentation. And it doesn't need to be, again, if you put too many things, they're going to be like, this is too much trouble. But if you just put one line, document your code well, and then review others' code for documentation, like people will start to understand like this is part of being a software engineer. So similar, like find the incentives for getting people to be excited about contributing documentation and showcasing them there. And I think you'll start to get some momentum. But I think setting the example for sure, like the founding team, this is how you do it, and this is what a high quality documentation contribution looks like, I think is important. Because again, I've been at companies where executives like they don't even put grammar into their emails because they're just telling you like, I'm too busy to capitalize my words and put periods and commas. And so why would anybody else like say, okay, I'm going to obsess over the quality of my writing if like our leadership is not doing that? If you signal without being overbearing, like people will just start to see that by example and follow that along.
That's awesome. I think in your recent blog posts where I was reading the importance of having a writer culture, you both in your separate blog posts, you kind of mentioned that. And I was going to ask a question about when startup founders should start thinking about that as part of a bigger kind of company culture, not just the technical documentation, but you've already answered that question. It's kind of like you set the tone as the leaders of the company, and you can do a lot early on to just encourage it and make it part of the process versus like something that's really not thought of from day one. I don't have any other questions. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have any other tips or any other final thing I should go look at or think about.
I would say resource-wise, this site, I just popped in the chat, the Nielsen Norman group, they have so much stuff. Like if you want to learn more about F patterns or information architecture, like all the nitty-gritty, their search is pretty good. Like you'll find stuff dating back like 20, 25 years up until, you know, recently they have videos. So I would say when you want to dive deep into something, that resource is great. But also like I guess my last tip would just be, if you set the goal of having high quality content, you know it's important, just know that it's going to be little steps like towards that. Like you're not going to perfect it, but if you're moving in that direction and taking little steps, like creating that habit, getting better, like you'll move slowly towards that like perfection goal, but then sometimes you'll just have huge breakthroughs and like make huge leaps forward. As long as you're constantly thinking about it and trying to make it better, you'll get there. So
exactly, perfect is the enemy of good. So don't put too much pressure, especially if it's people's first time you know, contributing to your code base and contributing documentation. It's like you don't want to be too like too hard on them.
That's awesome. Thank you both very much, David, Stephanie, for your time. And I'm going to put a lot of the stuff you said in practice, and hopefully in 6 months' time, when you look at the Infracost docs, it will be a lot better.
Awesome.
Super excited.
Thanks.
Looking forward to contributing to the open source docs.